Hello, today's video is on John chapter 19 verse 3. John 19 verse 3 is fairly direct, and we're going to be going off of some commentaries of the early church fathers, a lot of anti-Nicene fathers in fact. John 19 verse 3 says, "And they came to him, saying, Hail, the King of the Jews, and they were giving him slaps." So the word for hail is Harie, and then the word for Jews is Judaion, and then finally the word for slaps is rapismata. And the difference between the Byzantine and majority in the Textus Receptus and the Alexandrian and Westcott and Hort texts is simply the addition of this phrase, which means "and they came." So that's why some manuscripts have this and some just say "and they said." So pretty insignificant difference, even though it's a couple of words. So first of all, we have Saint Cyril of Alexandria following the Alexandrian manuscript. In his commentary on the Gospel of John, book 12, he says about Christ, "He suffers the crowd of soldiers to insult him, and put a crown of thorns about his head, and threw a purple robe on him, and buffeted him with palms of their hands, and otherwise dishonor him. For he thought he could easily put to shame the people of the Jews, if he saw the man who was altogether free from guilt suffering the punishment, only without a cause. He was scourged unjustly, that he might deliver us from merited chastisement. He was buffeted and smitten, that we might buffet Satan, who had buffeted us, and that we might escape from the sin that cleaves to us through the original transgression." And he goes on about Christ's sufferings in his body for our salvation, loosening the bonds of death, and so on. Then we have going to the word Hare, which means hail. It's the same word being used in the greeting by the angel Gabriel to the Virgin Mary, Hare. Anyway, we see though it also can mean rejoice or be glad. Here it's just used to mock Christ as a king. Though John does not record it, Matthew notes that when Judas betrayed Jesus with a kiss, he said Hare. Right here, Matthew 26 verse 49, "And forthwith he came to Jesus and said, Hail, Master, and kissed him." This is the same word the angel Gabriel used, as I mentioned. And then we have rapismata. John here seems to leave it implied or ambiguous about how Jesus was slapped, but Matthew's gospel adds more detail. "And they spit upon him, and they took the reed, and smote him on the head." This is Matthew 27 verse 30. In the prior verse of Matthew, the reed accompanied the crown of thorns as a faux scepter with which was used to slap him shortly after. Jesus was slapped earlier, similar to previously being told hello at the start of the betrayal, at the beginning of his trial, because he was perceived as disrespectful to the high priest Caiaphas. John 18 verse 22 says, "And he having said these things, one of the officers standing by did give Jesus a slap, rapisma, saying, Thus dost thou answer the high priest?" Or I should say chief priest. And it's pretty much the same in Matthew 26:67. Perhaps the double slapping is Jesus turning the other cheek, as said in the Sermon on the Mount, when he says in Luke 26:29, when it says, "To one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also." The Matthew version does use a similar word to John 19 verse 3 for slap. Matthew 5:39 says, "But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil, but if anyone slaps rapisai you on the right cheek, turn to him the other one also." And then we see how the word is used here. Okay, rapismata. The mention of slapping may be another reference to also Isaiah 50 verse 6 in the Septuagint. In fact, it is the only time rapismata is used in the Septuagint. As we see in Isaiah 50 verse 6 in the Septuagint, it says, having given my back to scourges and my cheeks to blows, horapismata, but I did not turn away my face from the shame of spittings. That's from the Net's translation of the Septuagint, by the way. And up here is the Masoretic translation, the common one. I gave my back to the smiters and my cheeks to them that pulled the hair off that plucked off my hair. I did not hide my face from shame and spitting. So I guess it's not really clear or implied, maybe. So we previously saw in John chapter 19 verse 1 the scourge was also fulfilled in Isaiah 50 verse 6. The apostolic fathers and anti-Nicene fathers, like the epistle of Barnabas from the late 1st or early 2nd century, believed this was fulfilled in Christ. The epistle of Barnabas says right here, chapter 5, says, he himself willed thus to suffer, for it was necessary that he should suffer on a tree. For he says he would prophesy regarding him, spare my soul from the sword, fasten my flesh with the nails, for the assemblies of the wicked have risen up against me. And again he says, behold, I have given my back to the scourges and my cheeks to the strokes. I have set my countenance as a firm rock. In fact, reading Barnabas, he says much of Isaiah 50 was fulfilled by Christ. Then we have the 2nd century church father, the philosopher and apologist St. Justin Martyr, called Justin the Philosopher in the East. And when the spirit of prophecy speaks from the person of Christ, the utterances are of this sort: I have spread out my hands to the disobedient and gainsaying people, to those who walk in a way that is not good. Isaiah 65 verse 2. And again, I have given my back to the scourges and my cheeks to the buffetings. I turned not my face away from the shame of the spittings, and the Lord was my helper. Therefore I was not confounded, but I set my face as a firm rock, and I knew that I should not be ashamed, for he is near that justifies me. Then we have St. Irenaeus of Lyons in the 2nd century, mid-2nd century also. He came from the east, but settled in what is now France, the south of France. And he says in his Adversus Horatius against heresies, book 4, chapter 33, some of them, moreover, when they predicted that, as a weak and inglorious man, and as one who knew what it was to bear infirmity, and sitting upon the fowl of an ass, he should come to Jerusalem, and that he should give his back to stripes, and his cheeks to palms, and that he should be led as a sheep to the slaughter. So one of those references, I guess, of course, is Isaiah 50 verse 6. Also noteworthy is Hosea 11:4 mentions God slapping, and I will be to them as a man smiting another on his cheek. Hosea 11 verse 1 is actually applied to Christ in Matthew. And finally, the King of the Jews reference, Judeon. The title is that of the Messiah, and implicitly of God himself, the original head of the Jews, since God did not want them to have a king initially, because he was their king. The Jews preferred Caesar as their king in this case, or the Judeans, rather than God. God allowed Israel's kings as a concession, similar to allowing divorce and other things in the Old Testament. They were just sort of like regulate, or as a concession, or not necessarily God's will or preference. The Jews were only to have a king through David, but many recognized a pagan as their king, per the priest in John 19 verse 15, which is contrary to the Torah. Deuteronomy 17 verse 15 says, you may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers shall set as a king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you, who is not your brother. So here it's saying the foreigner is not your brother, and you're not allowed to put someone who is not among an Israelite as a king. So clearly Caesar was not their brother. He was a pagan. He was a foreigner. This will be dealt with more in John chapter 19 when I make those comments. By Jesus' time, the term Israel and Jew/Judea had some overlap, since neither were kingdoms anymore. At the beginning of John's Gospel, Nathanael calls Jesus, the King of Israel. But anyway, this is it for this commentary.